So welcome back everybody. In today's episode we're going to be building an 8-foot picnic table, and I'm going to do my best to show you how to build this nice and easy. While I'll be using power tools, you don't have to have those in order to accomplish this. This is a great first beginner project for not much money. So I have a miter saw to help make this nice, quick, and easy for me, but you could use a hand saw and some sort of angle finder to mark out your angles. So for these first pieces, we're gonna start building the tabletop supports that go underneath. I need 3 pieces, 28.5 inches long, and we're gonna cut a 30-degree angle. You're gonna see we use that angle a lot. That's very common in picnic table building, and we're gonna cut exact opposite angles. So a 30-degree this way, 30-degree that way. Now we're going to measure down 28.5 inches from the longest point, and we're going to cut a 30-degree angle the exact opposite way. You could just leave the saw where it's at and flip it over, or it's so quick and easy on a saw like this just to spin it over. All right, so now you can see what we've created. 28.5 inches. We need 3 of these for tabletop supports with a 30-degree angle on both ends. And it'll make sense when we start putting this together while we've beveled an angle here so this doesn't actually stick out and catch your stomach if you're sliding up and down the picnic table. All right, next we're going to bring some 2x6s in. Again, this entire project's done with just getting 2x6s and 2x4s. And since our saw's already set up for 30-degree angles, we're going to continue to cut 30-degree angles here. Now, in order to get the most out of our board, these boards are 8 foot long or 96 inches. We're going to cut a 60 and a 30-inch piece out of this, 90 inches leaving just a little bit of waste. So make sure when you do this project, even though we're about to cut 4 36-inch pieces, don't cut them all out of one board because you're going to wind up with excess waste. We're going to cut 136 and 160 that we need. This is going to be for our table legs and our seat supports right here. We'll show you all this in a second. So this time we're going to cut our angles the same direction. Again, 36 inches here. So now we're left with a long piece, and we are going to bevel back the exact opposite direction. So the piece that we just cut, you can see the angles are the same direction. On this particular piece, they're going to be exact opposite, just like the table supports that we cut. Now these are going to be for our legs, so we're going to measure down 60 inches. Flip my board around so I don't have to change my saw. Discard our little bit of waste. And now you can see here, angles are back in towards each other, 60 inches overall length. So I'm going to cut the camera off. We're going to cut 2 of the 60-inch pieces, 4 of the 36-inch pieces. We'll show you all this before we put it together. Next, we're going to be cutting some seat braces. Because this is a extra large 8-foot-long picnic table, the majority are 6 foot, by the way. We want the room. We're going to need to put some seat braces so our seats do not sag on us. There's a couple different ways you can do this. We'll discuss it later, but we're going to basically put some runners underneath both the seat 2x6s on either side. So we're going to cut 4 2x4s at 77 inches. We're just going to cut them off square on the ends. Okay, once again, because we're making such a long picnic table, we need to do some extra bracing in the middle of the table, or otherwise we're going to experience some sag. So the last thing that we're going to cut is some bracing that's going to go from the legs itself to support the center of the table. These need to be at a 20-degree angle, and the angles will be cut both the same direction, and we're going to cut these 41.5 inches. So let's go ahead and get our first 20-degree cut. Measure down 41.5. And that 41.5, all these measurements I'm giving you, no matter how the angles are, that's overall. So don't measure from one tip here to 41.5 here, because whenever you make your long cut this direction, you're going to be even longer. So this is overall measurements that I'm giving you. All right, I'm going to cut one more of those because we only need 2 braces. So let me explain what I was talking about. I just measured from the longest point because we're at an angle. I came down 41.5 inches, which is here, but I don't want to make my 20-degree cut there because by the time I come down here, it would be a lot longer. So one way you can do this is just make your 41.5 inch mark. And then I take a square and just transfer that line down here. Okay, that's the last of our cuts. All of our other lumber is 8-foot pieces, which we've already bought. Now you need to understand something. Just because we bought 8-foot lumber at the store doesn't mean they're all gonna be the same length. You can go ahead and cut them now to a perfect 96 inches, or you can do what I'm gonna do. Assemble my tabletop, and then I'm gonna cut a straight line across both ends, squaring everything up and making sure all boards are the exact same length. So you got 2 ways you can do that. Okay, so you can assemble your table on a flat surface like the floor, or I'm going to use some sawhorses so I've got this up in the air and I'm not bending over so much. So our tabletop is going to be put together with 5 2x6s, and then we're going to space them apart, leave a gap for rainwater and debris to go through. So I'm going to go ahead and bring 5 2x6s in, lay them right here, and then we'll get everything nice and squared up. Make sure you save your best looking 2x6s for this, because this is going to be your tabletop. So whatever's the best looking side that doesn't have all the writing and everything else on it, put that down, because we're going to be assembling the bottom side and then flipping this over. So it's worth noting, you could build this a 7-foot picnic table, a 6-foot picnic table, and use all the same measurements that I've currently already cut, minus the seat supports. Those will need to shorten down whatever size table you built. But all of our cross supports, legs, everything else, the degrees that we use, that all will work. You can adjust your table accordingly to whatever size you want to make. All right, so you remember these table supports right here? We made these 28.5 inches, and the reason they're that length is because I want to use 5 boards up top. Even though these are called 2x6s, they're not true dimension lumber. They're 1.5 inches by 5.5 inches. So if you take 5.5 inches times 5 boards and leave, I've decided to go with a 1/4 inch gap, that will get you out to your 28.5 inches. So when we flip this support over, we're going to put it on the edge of a board here, and we're going to space these where it'll be on the edge of a board over there. We're going to have one support 8 inches from the end here, another support 8 inches from the end down here, and then we'll put one in the middle because we're going to do some bracing to this to support such a large table. Now I have all of my boards evenly spaced, and I just used my speed square as a spacer. Y'all seen that I just went through and made sure everything's spaced out all the way across. Now we're going to take one of our supports, flip it over. Again, we want the angles, this is the bottom side of the table, going away from the people's stomachs. That's why we cut those angles on there. And we're going to space this exactly 8 inches from the edge. All right, so once we get that spacing, I'm just going to draw a line down alongside the board real quick on both sides. And now we're going to pre-drill for some 3-inch deck screws that we're going to run in from the other side. So you could flip this over and assemble it however you want to. I'm trying to keep this really beginner easy, but you could drill what's called pocket holes in the side of this board right here and screw in from the underneath side into these boards, and you would never see any fasteners underneath on the other side. That'll give you a really clean looking picnic table. I thought about doing it that way, but I don't have any pocket hole screws that are exterior rated for treated lumber. And again, most people are not going to own a pocket hole jig building a project like this. So now that we've marked either side, let's remove our board. See our lines here. I'm going to take a drill bit. You could take like an 1/8 inch drill bit, for example, and we're going to pre-drill holes 2 per 2x6, just like that, all the way through. Then we're going to put down a layer of exterior rated wood glue. We want to get this nice and strong, put across here, put our board back, and then I'll come in from underneath with those holes that we just pre-drilled, and I'm going to use some deck screws. These are actually rated for pressure treat lumber. Make for sure you get a coated deck screw, and I got some brown ones to kind of blend in with the lumber itself. But if you use regular drywall screws, they will rust out. Okay, I'm going to pre-drill all of these holes. Again, 2 per 2x6. And go nice and slow because we don't want to shift this out because we've already got everything perfectly spaced. which you can always come back and redo that. All right, now that we've got everything pre-drilled, let's go ahead and put down some wood glue. I'm about to be quick with this. It's starting to rain. Wood glue is not necessary, but man, does it make a very strong bond. So I wouldn't skip that step. You can either smooth it out, but once this board pulls down, it should be just fine. Now I can come in from the underneath side with these screws, and I know everywhere to put a hole because the holes have been pre-drilled for me. We'll worry about torquing everything down when we flip this over. And then we'll do a final sanding to take care of some of the splintered wood that's sticking out on the other side as well. All right, so now we're going to take the pieces that we've cut with same angles on both ends, our leg sections here, and we're going to attach them to these bottom table supports that we just put in. Don't forget, these are 8 inches from the edge. I've already got my middle one installed. It's dead center, so 48 inches of my 8-foot boards. Now I'm going to put a little glue on the back side of this, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to do my spacing here. All right, so you've seen I put some glue on the back side here, and here's how I did my spacing. Just take the very edge of this board, count 2 boards in on your table, 1, 2, and just flush it up with the edge of this one right here. I just shot 2 quick screws in along with the glue to hold this, but because this is a critical section of the table here, we need this very strong, we're actually going to pre-drill some holes here and run some carriage bolts through. Flush this up with the second board in. Now we have 2 legs attached. I'm gonna go ahead and attach the other side, and then we're gonna put our carriage bolts in. We need this nice and strong before we ever flip this over. Plus we have some additional bracing to do. All right, so now we're gonna pre-drill a couple of holes, and we're gonna stagger them offset of each other. These are 3/8 holes that I'm drilling, and this is to run some carriage bolts through. All right, so what I picked up here is some 3.5 inch long carriage bolts. They got a smooth head on one side and your typical bolt threads on the other. So these are 3/8 bolts. I highly recommend you going with at least that thick of a bolt. And those were 3/8 holes that I drilled. All right, perfect. Really nothing sticking out to catch anybody. That's why that 3.5 inch size is the correct size to use. Now that our legs are bolted in, we want to install our cross brace here, and this is ultimately what's going to be our seat benches as well, but it's also going to brace these legs. So we need to measure down, which is kind of difficult to do unless you just take a straight edge or a board like this, put up here, and what we're wanting to do is measure down 16.5 inches from the bottom side of these legs, and I'm going to make a mark right here. That also equals 12 inches up from the bottom of the table to that same mark. So you can either measure from the bottom up or throw something up here and measure 16.5 down. Doesn't matter, as long as all your cuts are exact like I've shown you, it should match up just fine. So in order to get our brace centered up correctly, you really need a second set of hands. That's where I'm going to use some clamps right here. So since I just made that mark 16.5 inches down or 12 inches up, I am going to take this board right here, put it on the mark on both sides, and clamp it and allow this to kind of be a holding set of hands for me. A cheap set of clamps, oh, they're so handy. Every shop should have a set of these. All right, now that board's flush with that line, I can take our seat brace board right here and we can install it. The thing got to pay attention to, we want the angle of this matching the angle that we also cut down here on these braces. Again, because we're putting boards here, we don't want people catching on that. That's why we cut those 30-degree angles. All right, now that I have this where it needs to be, I'll make a couple marks to know that I can get this back exactly where it belongs. Because we're going to pull this off and put some glue on the back side right here. Now we'll grab the pre-drill for these 3/8 carriage bolts. Now, since these are going to be visible, I'm going to put the flush head to this side. The other ones were not. Plus, I was able to see by getting 3.5-inch long ones, they're not really sticking out on the inside at all to catch somebody's leg. So I feel pretty good about that. All right, now we'll tighten these up. I'll do the same thing to the other side, put our brace in on those other legs, and then I'll meet y'all right back. All right, so let's go over some measurements real quick. The two boards that we cut, 77 inches, these are our seat support braces right here. Because this is such a long table, there's something you got to keep in mind here. If we just run 2x6s across like we have here, the table's going to sag, and especially the seat if we just run across up here without these braces. If somebody sits in the middle, it's just going to bow down like crazy. Now these supports in here, just like this, are not strong enough because we've only got 2 screws on each end per board. 3 or 4 people sitting on this would strip those out. So whenever we put our 2x6s up top, we're actually going to screw down into the supports, tying everything together, making it very, very strong. So you do have to screw your top caps, your top 2x6s like this, down into these. Or again, if you have a pocket hole jig, you could drill some holes up from the side and run your fasteners from underneath and never see any holes up top if you want a really clean looking table. All right, so because we've cut an angle, we can't run the 2x4 all the way to the end because, well, it would be sticking out. We also want the 2x4 in the center of the 2x6 that's about to get capped up here. So let me show you these measurements right here because it's important. So from the edge of the seat brace to the first 2x4 is 2 inches. To the second 2x4 is 7 3/4 inch. All right, one of the last pieces to install are these braces that we cut right here. They're going to go down from this bottom leg all the way up to the top dead center of the table on this brace right here. All right, so here we are next day. Technically, the table's done. You could use it as is, but we can take it a step further to not only look better, but be a little safer and more functional. So it's not uncommon to get a bunch of wood with ends and knots like this. You can try to be picky getting it at the store, but you're gonna overlook some stuff. And I don't like the way this looks. Plus, all the lumber is different lengths, and you can tell that by looking down. Again, you can trim all that before you put it on here, or you can trim after the fact like I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna measure back in 1 inch, and we're gonna take 1 inch off of this, off of the seat, because we want everything to match, and we have busted out pieces there, and knots, splits. So we're gonna take 1 inch off of everything to clean the edges up. Then to take away these sharp corners, and to give it a little bit of character and some look, we're going to lob off all corners of the seats and tabletop. It looks really good. Then to finish it up, because everywhere you shoot screws in, you have little pieces of wood sticking out. You have a rough tabletop. You have rough edges where people's legs are going to be. I think I'm going to router the edges with a round over bit to make everything nice and smooth, and sand it all real quick with some 80 grit sandpaper. All right, so here we are with a relatively large 8-foot picnic table. And by the way, the majority of what you're gonna find are 6-foot tables. So keep that in mind when you're pricing out and looking to buy one. The reason it makes sense to do 8 foot for me is you're already buying 8-foot lumber. So let's don't cut off 2 feet of it and have all that waste. Plus, where we're about to carry this to, there is going to be quite a few of us down there at times. So we can fit up to 8 people on this table, not counting the ends. 6 very comfortable. So let's put this thing to the test. I'd say it's quite strong. We're never gonna have this much food up on here. Only a minor little bit of flex, and I really like the way that I built this one with the supports underneath the bench. Now, the strongest table you could build would be to build another set of legs and mount it right here in the middle, but when people need to slide up and down and make room for somebody else, you would have a leg right here really getting in your way. So I opted to do the standard bracing and then do extra bracing under the seat. I think if I were to make a 10-footer or any bigger of a picnic table, I would absolutely put a leg in the middle, but I think this is gonna be just fine for the amount of typical people that we're going to have on it here. Now y'all, here's the thing. Since this is treated lumber, we can leave it as is, which we're going to, or you can actually stain this, put weatherproofer on it. You can do whatever you want. You can completely change the color of this and protect it even further. Now let me give you a piece of advice. When you have green lumber like this was still very, very wet lumber. I highly suggest you let this bake in the sun for weeks, if not a few months, completely dry out before you do your staining. It is very hard to get stain to absorb in wet, moisture-filled wood like this. All right, so let's go over some numbers. I know you're gonna be curious about that. I shared all the measurements of this. This is an excellent first DIY project. You do not have to have all the tools that I did. A good handsaw, maybe a drill to put some screws in, you're done. All the extra stuff I did for sanding and rounding over, not necessary, and you can do a lot of that by hand as well. Now, I've been seeing these listed online for sale for several $100s. So let's see what we have in one of these. So for starters, I paid $7.15 for the 2x6s. I thought that was an excellent deal. Looks like we used 12 of them if I remember correctly. So there's $85 in lumber. Let's add up the 2x4s, which I paid $5.89 for. So we have roughly $120 in lumber, give or take. I actually added in an extra piece of lumber there because I did buy some extra. You should always do that with your project. You're gonna find a split piece or something bad. And as far as the bolts and hardware go, the cheapest place you can buy those, because they sell them by the pound, not per piece, Tractor Supply. I have $14 in the hardware. If you buy your hardware from anywhere else, you're gonna pay per bolt and it gets very expensive. So it's worth it to go buy a Tractor Supply or any place you know that sells in bulk and by the pound. So we have roughly $135 and an 8-foot picnic table. I can't even find a 6-footer around here for anywhere near this price, much less an 8-footer. Some of them around here are up to $600, but I have seen some for less as well. It pays to shop around, but nobody's gonna sell them for anywhere near what you can buy the lumber for and do it yourself, because they need to be paid back for their labor as well. But you can save big time money doing this and have fun in the process. All right, here it is at its new home. I'd say this is a pretty good spot for it right here. So now we can pull up here, offload all the stuff out of the vehicles, cook out, have a fire, and enjoy this view for the rest of the winter.